Who was the biggest winner from the Dallas Cowboys practices this week? All that and more in this episode of Locked On Cowboys Podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast
Locked
Network, your
On.
team every day.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode of Locked On Cowboys is brought to you by eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. The same is true for your vehicle. So for the parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit at ebaymotors.com. And let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit available only to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, the Cowboys have wrapped up practice for this week. I think they have a practice. What's it?
Saturday.
Saturday.
No, not today. Saturday, and then I think no Sunday, and then Monday, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so. We're getting ready for the preseason game, which happens next. I think it's next Sunday is the preseason. So we kind of wanted just to review all the things that happened during the Cowboys padded practice this week. But first, we're going to talk about some of the players that surprised us. Who surprised you the most out in Oxnard?
Well, we've been talking about it, and I think, it's the names that we're going to say are not going to be surprising here necessarily, but they certainly were when we started noticing them. Obviously, the first one we have to mention probably is Jalen. And I almost
Jalen Brooks.
I almost called him Smith. I almost did it. Jalen Brooks, who, look, he's come out here, was largely an afterthought in a lot of this. I think, the Cowboys fans were maybe a little bit surprised to see the Cowboys take a wide receiver that late. But he's come in here and just impressed from the beginning, has made plays almost every single day, shown that he's belonged, has kind of made his way up, the depth chart. And hasn't let go. Now, obviously, there was an interesting conversation between you and Dave Hellman on Twitter about this, and Dave's, correct. And we've said this same thing too, that this happens every year. Like there's one of these guys every year. And the thing we have to kind of continually remind ourselves is that it's not about one or two practices. It's about the drum beat. And we're going to stay on the drum beat about the drum beat, honestly. Like, it's just important that they continue. These guys need to show a level of consistency day in and day out in order to make this roster. So far, he's kept up that pace. It's a tough pace for a young player, but he's kept it up. And as of right now, I would be kind of shocked if he continues at this rate, which that's a very large if. If he continues at this rate, I would be pretty shocked if he didn't make the roster at this point.
Ben, you stole the next question out of my mouth because that's what I was going to ask you. But is he going to make the 53-man roster? I think the reason the Cowboys drafted him in the 7th round was because of his special teams ability.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's the reason they drafted him. And he knew that. I remember us talking the day after the draft about Jalen Brooks, some of the quotes that he had about, hey, I know my role is to be a special teams player. That's how I'm going to make a living in the NFL. Yeah. The fact that he's actually making plays on offense, it's got to be like the Cowboys front office has to be just grinning from ear to ear. With the selection right now, right?
Look, you're hoping that a 7th round pick can come in and just be a special teams contributor. That would be a fantastic step. But and I think that that's still what we're talking about, like that. I don't know that he's playing his way into playing.
He's not going to be the number 4 wide receiver.
Yeah. So I think what he is playing himself onto is a roster spot, which means he likely will play on game days. But, the number of wide receiver snaps that this guy is likely to get in season is only if, there's multiple injuries, I would imagine. But the fact that he's even in striking range of that, and the fact that he's, kind of just instantly played himself onto the team. Not played himself onto the team. We still got a ways to go.
But given himself a great chance.
He set a pace that's very high, and that if he can continue that pace, obviously it's going to be tough to cut him. And I don't imagine that the Cowboys will.
There's also a spot on this team for the receiver that can block a little bit, that they use in short yardage and they use on early downs. Noah Brown is gone. That's not CeeDee Lamb. It's certainly not Brandon Cooks. I think Michael Gallup can do that a little bit. Jalen Tolbert maybe, but I mean, there is a role for like a 5 snap a game player just to come in and block at wide receiver. And if he can do that, he's going to earn himself some actual playing time on offense.
Yeah, he's a a little bit bigger guy, so he can do a lot of those things. Maybe he's not quite the physical presence that Noah Brown was coming out of college, but I think that he has a bigger frame. He can do a lot of that kind of move tight end, so that move wide receiver, blocking wide receiver stuff if you need him to, because he can throw his body around.
It's more about being willing, though. That's the main thing.
That's what I was just going to say. He clearly has a physical presence because he's so good on all those special teams that he's not afraid to kind of mix it up. So, I think he's clearly shown that he's set himself on a trajectory to make this team. Again, he has to keep it up in order to do it, but it's so far so good.
Who else has surprised you at camp?
When Donovan Wilson went down and then Mukwamu right after him, all in the same practice, we named a whole bunch of safeties that we felt like we were excited to see. Marquise Bell, Tyler Coyle were guys that we highlighted heavily because those were more kind of the box safety types that would be taking Donovan Wilson's spot, right? And Mukwamu in some ways too. But to me, the guy that has not that those other two guys haven't played well, I think that they've been fine. It's tough to notice the second level safety when you're playing on a first team off defense that is filled with fast guys. So he just hasn't necessarily stuck out the way Wanye Thomas has, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Wanye's played a little bit more on the back end. We've seen him in coverage. I've noticed him covering guys at one-on-one situations, tight ends, and doing a really good job. He's got his hands on the football. He's physical. He's loud. He's confident playing back there. You could tell based on the way that when he makes plays, how his teammates feel about him, and when he's in there, that they feel confident. Wanye Thomas, I think, is kind of indirectly answered a lot of the questions that we had about, even though we have a very deep safety group, we have wondered who is the next best guy to be playing kind of that hooker role, right? Like if Hooker goes down, who's the guy that kind of can come in and play free safety when they need a single high situation? Who's going to be in that middle of the field closed kind of safety that can, make sure that everything stays in front of them, because that's not necessarily Bell's game. That's not necessarily Tyler Coyle's game. I mean, they can do those things. And Wilson obviously can do those things as well, because that's why he makes him the starter, because he's so versatile. But who's the backup there if you don't have Hooker? And I think Thomas has kind of answered that question pretty well, and has shown that he is capable of playing on this defense, and not, they're not losing a big step if he's out there roaming the back end of this defense.
One more name that I want to bring up, and I'm always skeptical of the smaller receivers because it's just so easy to get them the ball in practice, but it's a lot harder to do it in actual games. It's Kevontae Turpin.
Yeah.
But by all accounts, it seems like he's having a fantastic camp.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the thing for me that's really surprising about Turpin is that I just didn't have very high expectations for his usage as a receiver. Just based on what we saw last year, what we saw in camp at different points, he seemed to be kind of a gadget guy in the sense that, is he incredibly dangerous with the football in his hands? Absolutely. That's why he's on this team, right? But he didn't seem like a guy that, just again, based on what we saw during the regular season and during training camp, he didn't seem like a guy that was going to end up being useful, being deployed out in routes or running routes down the field and trying to get open and catching the football down the field. You obviously you try to find ways to get him the ball in space, and sometimes that's going to have to happen a little bit downfield. But to me, I felt like he was going to be relegated to kind of that sort of Lucky Whitehead role, right? Where it's like you're not sending him out on routes necessarily, but he's doing a lot of jet sweep stuff. You may throw him some screens, some smoke route stuff. The thing that we've seen from Turpin out here is him going out and route, him running whip routes from the slot, him getting open down the field, and making catches, away from his body, outside his frame. Now, look, it hasn't been perfect. I saw him drop a pass that was a little bit outside of his frame. It was a tough catch, but the fact is he's there, he's getting his hands on it, and he's catching a high percentage of this, certainly a higher percentage than I thought. And the fact is that he's getting out there and he's finding ways to get open. He's using his route running skills, his elite athleticism and change of direction skills to find ways to create space to get open. And if he can do that and get the ball in his hands, look, I mean, I've already said that I think that he's shown enough added skill to his game that I think he's on the roster. I think that there's a chance now that if he can continue this kind of pace and maybe even grow a little bit more as a receiver, he could be a valuable, change of pace receiver that they deploy, 3 or 4 times a game or something to try to get in route and just be an option. Another guy that the defense has to keep track of, that if he catches the ball, he can turn it up and obviously make something really dangerous happen.
I just struggle with these type of players with Dallas because I've seen, you mentioned Lucky Whitehead. Tavon Austin had 21 receptions in 2 years with the Cowboys. Dwayne Harris, I'm looking at his numbers right now, played 4 years with the Cowboys.
He barely counts even. Dwayne Harris is so big, like compared to the rest of these guys.
He's true, but he was you're right.
But yes,
Dwayne Harris is a different type because he was 215 pounds.
But they were so rare that you have to include him. I totally understand. The Cowboys just have not used this type of player in the past. I think that the difference is the change in administration, don't you? Like,
I would agree.
They clearly have made a commitment to holding on to these types of players. They went out and got Kevontae Turpin, held on to him. Obviously, he's a Pro Bowl kick returner, punt returner last year. We'll see more of that. They went out and drafted a Deuce Vaughn. They clearly didn't have any problems with his size. Now the smallest player in the NFL. So I'm hoping that there is a sea change here, simply because it's not just the Vaughn thing. We're seeing Vaughn, and then they are deploying Turpin in, he's part of the rotation. This isn't like,
it's not a gadget thing. He's an actual receiver now.
He's in the rotation with the rest of the group. Like, they're treating him like a normal receiver. They're not like, excluding him or just having him as like doing certain things. He's doing everything else with all the receivers, and he seems to be doing it at a rate that could play him onto the team, even if he wasn't a kick returner.
Let's talk about some of the players that have maybe had their stock fall a little bit during this week of practice next. This episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. August is here, and you know what that means. It is the official start of fantasy football season. Get championship ready for your home league by trying out Best Ball on Underdog Fantasy. All you have to do is one live snake draft, no waivers, no trades. Underdog will set your best fantasy lineup every single week. Try it out with Underdog's Best Ball Mania tournament. The largest fantasy football contest of all time is back, and it's even bigger now with $15 million of total prizes up for grabs, including, get this, an absurd $3 million going to the winner. Last year, the winner actually drafted their team in July, so you're not going to want to wait around. You want to get your teams in right now. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with promo code LOCKEDON to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That is Underdog Fantasy, promo code LOCKEDON. I absolutely love Underdog. I do at least a draft a day. I like to do the 30-second drafts that are so quick. It's so much fun. Go check it out. Make sure you use our promo code LOCKEDON to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every day, we will be back on Monday to break down the practices over the weekend, so make sure you tune in for that. But today, we are talking about some of the biggest fallers from this last week of practice. Landon, who disappointed for you?
And listen, it's tough because there's always a give and take where there's winners, there's losers on the other side of the ball that are having to face these guys. And look, as much praise as we have for this defensive line and what they've done, especially the defensive tackle position, to me, the disappointment has certainly come from the interior offensive line backups, right? Like, and this is an area where we needed to see some critical improvements, some of these players. And I think that we have, and this isn't over yet by any stretch of the imagination. And I will also say that I feel like as a group that they made improvements. And that especially yesterday, as the practice went on, you started to see more and more them making more and more headway against what is, look, clearly a very, very good defensive line. Like, I mean, sure. I think that we all understand that, like, in some ways it's absolutely unfair for Dante Fowler to be facing OT5. It's like that's just part of what we're having to face. So, but I will say that I was hoping to see a little bit more from guys like TJ Bass. I think Brock Hoffman has really, really struggled at different points. Yeah, for sure. And I will add in that I think that, you start, like we've talked about Asim Richards, and I think that I did see a couple snaps of him working with the twos yesterday, which is good. And I think he's, they need him there. But like some of these guys that we were hoping that would kind of get into the mix here a little bit more, honestly, I hate to include his name here, but Farniak has been a lot more up and down than I'd hoped. I mean, he had
really hoping that he would take hold of that kind of swing interior spot.
I feel like he's probably maybe a better guard than he is a center. I mean, clearly he had problems with the snap yesterday. He fumbled 2 snaps with Dak. Part of that is getting used to the guy that you're snapping to, but Farniak has had this issue before. So
they might just not have a backup center on this roster.
Yeah, or it just may be a situation where they may need to focus more on it with him, because I think he could physically play the position, but the snaps are a problem at this point, and you can't have that if he's being put into the game, obviously. So interior offensive line is really where I felt like the most kind of disappointment as far as a group, and we named some of the names. I'll throw out one more name if I can, and that's Simi Fehoko, simply because. And again, he's not played poorly necessarily. He hasn't played necessarily great either, but the injury, the fact that he hasn't been able to necessarily separate himself from some of these other folks. Again, we talked about it, like where there's winners, there's also losers, right? Sure. In the wide receiver room, you've got all these guys beneath him that are really, really, really playing well. And the downside for that is that it's going to be at the expense of guys like Simi Fehoko. So he needs to have a really great week of practice next week to kind of get back on track and kind of solidify his grip on that wide receiver 4 spot. Because one of the other names that we did mention before, Jalen Tolbert, has continued his drumbeat throughout these weeks of practice.
So in your mind, Jalen Tolbert significantly ahead of Simi?
I mean, I don't know how you couldn't have Jalen Tolbert at 4, because you haven't seen enough from Fehoko, especially with the injury. And even when he was healthy, Tolbert was outpacing him for the spot, right? Like just the practices they were in together, Tolbert was having better practices. Sure. So I think at this point, I do put him ahead.
I want to go back to the interior offensive line really quickly. One name that we haven't mentioned at all over the last week is Josh Ball. I just wanted to know, did you see, just by your facial reaction there, I think it tells a story. What have you seen from Josh Ball at guard?
I mean, again, look, Josh Ball's not Zach Martin, and that's the real problem, I think, is that we're seeing Josh Ball take almost exclusively all first team reps at right guard.
But is he a guard? That's what I want to know.
Well, he's whatever he is, he's overmatched. Like, like he doesn't look like, I mean, again, where there's winners, across from them, there's losers, right? Like, and I think that the defensive tackle room, who begot what? Like, was it a really great defensive tackle play, or is Josh Ball just playing that terribly? So I think there is a certain amount of parsing that we're having to do there. And I think that also goes the other way. Is Josh Ball really having a terrible camp, or are the defensive tackles really that good? I tend to think that I'll say this. Josh Ball has gotten stronger in the offseason. He looks physically stronger. There are definitely times when you see him physically holding up like that. His technique's not there though. And right now, like he's just, especially when you get Steele and Smith out there on the tackles, you definitely notice that he's the weak link.
Well, and that's the concern though, is we're going into year 3 now with Josh Ball. And if the technique's not there now, is it ever going to be?
This to me feels like an exercise in, and excuse the phrase, giving somebody enough rope to hang themselves, right? Like they are giving him full opportunity to win this job, because I think after this, like, hey, you got your shot, buddy. Like that was it. So
we gave you a ton of practice reps to show whether you can be an NFL offensive lineman or not. I do wonder, like, this is probably the Cowboys have a lot of depth at several different positions, but I've got a feeling that interior offensive line is where they're going to be looking on waivers when we get to cut downs.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't over yet. Obviously, a good week of practice from one of these guys can really turn this thing around. And I do very much believe in the idea that training camp, you're supposed to get better, and some of these guys 1 week will not be ready for prime time, and then suddenly next week the light clicks. They understand what they're doing, and it works. So there's still plenty of time for that to happen. But I will say, generally speaking, that I feel more like the Cowboys may need to consider a veteran backup situation in the interior than I did when we went into training camp.
Last one before we move on. We can't mention this player by name because he searches it out on Twitter. Our Oklahoma defensive tackle, how's he looked in camp?
Look, I've been critical of him, and clearly, yes, he is. He's looking for critics to kind of motivate and goad him. And great, man. Like, listen, if our comments like
Neville Gallimore, by the way, just in case you're unfamiliar, go ahead.
Fair. Sir Neville Gallimore
at Marcus _Marger, please go ahead.
No, listen, if our comments goad you into psyching yourself out to playing well, then kudos to us, man. We'd love to see that. My concern with Gallimore and I think the concern of the guy who posted that, John Owning, is that it seems like it's neither nor with him, right? It's like you're not getting. He's terrible at taking on double teams, and that's fine. Like, not every defensive tackle is going to be good at that.
Sure.
But you got to be great as a pass rusher. You got to like more than make up for it. And I think he can play the run. Like, if he's in a one-on-one situation, he can hold up. He's strong. I mean, I do feel like he's gotten maybe a little bit stronger and a little bit better athleticism. We heard similar situations last year with him, but I just feel like he's getting turned too much. He's getting pushed off the ball, and he's not doing enough right now as a pass rusher for me to justify his spot over some of these other guys who have really started to show up, like Bohanna, and you've already got Golston, and you've got Osa and Mozzie and
Jonathan Hankins,
and you like Fahoku and some of the things you've seen him do. It's like, it just feels like he needed to take a significant step forward to re-solidify his spot on the team. And I think he probably is playing better football than he did last year. But I mean, I've seen this from him in training camps before, and it translated into not great regular season play. So I'm just skeptical. And I think listen, Neville, if you're listening, like, I think that's reasonable for us to be skeptical here. So,
sure.
And go out and prove us wrong, man. Like, go destroy some guys. I'm here for it.
All right, later. Let's talk about some players that we are looking forward to seeing this week before the Cowboys have their first preseason game next. All right, Landon, what are you looking forward to seeing next week in practice before the Cowboys get ready for their first preseason game on Sunday?
Well, I think the first thing we need to talk about is kind of checking back in with our drumbeat guys, right? And right now, I would say we talked about Brooks, we talked about Thomas, some other guys that we have mentioned as kind of drumbeat guys in one form or another. Osa Odigizua, who I think has had a fantastic camp and is a drumbeat guy, not because, let's see if he can make the team. We know he's making the team. It's drumbeat for, can he take a step? Can he take a step up to another level, which I think we've kind of consistently seen.
He might be the key to the Cowboys having the difference between like a top 7 defense and the number 1 defense, because if he turns into defensive tackle is loaded in the NFC. I don't want to say Pro Bowl, but like that caliber of player, all of a sudden you've got a defensive player of the year candidate on one side, Micah Parsons. You've got a Pro Bowl defensive end, DeMarcus Lawrence. And then you've got a Pro Bowl defensive tackle. Teams aren't going to be able to block you. You're going to be able to get pressure with your front 4 on every single play, which is going to make the job of the back end guys so much easier. I just feel like he's kind of the keystone for that defensive line.
And I hope that whatever guard you have left over to block Mozzie Smith can stop him for as long as the play goes, because otherwise he's going to toss him onto your lap. So, I mean, I think I think that's it. Is that you nailed it? Is that if Osa really takes his game to a next level, this defense goes to the next level, because that's really the one kind of spot that this defense was missing, was elite defensive tackle play. Obviously, why they drafted the guy. Some other guys that are drumbeat guys, Jalen Tolbert obviously is number 1 drumbeat guy for us, right? We need to see, again, not a making the team drumbeat, But this is he going to be wide receiver 4 drumbeat?
Yep.
And so far, so good. He has continued to perform. There hasn't been splash plays every single day, but there's been solid play every single practice, not, rashes of drops or lack of confidence. Now, I will say that Jalen Tolbert had a lot of this last season too. If you remember at training camp, he didn't have a bad training camp.
No,
in fact,
not at all.
he had a good training camp to a point. So this is why he's on this drumbeat, because we've seen this before. What we're seeing now, he's playing better than he did last year. I will say that it's a level above, but we've seen him have consistent play before and then drop off at the end of training camp. So what we need to see is, can he maintain this level of play throughout the rest of camp? And then I
got
guess,
one for
yeah,
really
give me some, please.
Schoonmaker. I want to see. I don't want necessarily need to see Schoonmaker be like full go in practice, but I'd like to at least see him do some individual stuff. Just get back on the field. I mean, you've reported this over the last couple of days, but it seems like he's trending in the right direction. He's
definitely
not far off. Just want to see him making some progress so we can see him at maybe once in the preseason, or have him be fully ready to go by week 1, because the Cowboys are going to need him. Like, they're going to use a lot of tight ends. They're going to need his size and athleticism. I just want to see some kind of progress over the next 7 days.
Yeah. And look, I mean, I was talking to somebody about this practice yesterday. He's already so good at kind of running these crossers, and as a blocker coming out of college, his game is incomplete. Obviously, he's a rookie tight end, but he has a skill set already that I think you can deploy.
Sure.
Maybe not as the starter at this point because he's missed some time, but that you can deploy and get useful reps out of him where he can be valuable to this offense as he's learning on the fly the rest of it. I mean, that's the benefit of having all these other tight ends at this point, right? Is that you can certainly buy him some time while he's figuring it out. But even then, I do have a strong faith that he can come in, he can make plays early as they need them with his, because he's got. I mean, wait till if you guys haven't noticed, he's huge. He's bigger than these other guys, noticeably bigger than these other tight ends. Someone called him, and I thought this was really great. A shout out to Rabble Rouser, called him more athletic David LaFleur. And I was like, oh man, that's it exactly. Because he's very big. He presents a big target. And that's why I think he's really good on these crossing routes, is that he will present a big target for Dak. And we're going to see a lot more of that stuff as we see some of these play action naked bootlegs popping out the backside. He will be a valuable target in those situations.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Again, every day. So we're going to be back on Monday breaking down the practices over the weekend. So make sure you tune in for that. Check our show out on YouTube. We go live. We post an episode every single day. Multiple episodes that we did this week. I think 3 extra episodes, all in the live section on there. So go check them out. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. We are free and available on all platforms. And we'll see you right back here on Monday.